Fluorescent light in the break room buzzed like it always did on Tuesday mornings, and I was pouring my second cup of coffee when my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "We need your room. Sylvie is moving back in. You have until the end of the month." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't misreading the tone, the flatness of it, like she was telling me the cable bill went up. I set my coffee down, picked up my phone and typed back, "Are you serious?" She didn't answer for 6 hours. When she did, it was 2 words, "Talk tonight." That night, I sat across from my mother at the kitchen table I'd eaten breakfast at for 26 years. My stepfather, Dale. I'd called him Dad since I was 9, though that word felt strange in my mouth by that point, sat with his arms folded at the head of the table. My younger sister Sylvie, 22, freshly unemployed after quitting her 3rd job in 14 months, sat to my mother's right. She was picking at her nail polish. Nobody offered me a seat. I took one anyway. "We talked about it," my mother said, "and it makes the most sense. Sylvie needs stability. You're independent. You've always been independent." "I live here," I said. "You're 31, Dale said, as if that settled anything. "I pay rent." My mother's eyes did this thing, a small flicker sideways toward Dale, and I'd learned by then what that flicker meant. It meant a decision had already been made before I walked in. "We'll give your deposit back," she said. It wasn't a deposit, it was rent for the last 4 years. "Enough." Dale pressed his palms flat on the table. "Sylvie needs the room. Your mother and I need this to work. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." Sylvie finally looked up from her nails. She didn't say sorry. She said, "I already measured for my furniture." I drove back to my office that night, not because I had anything to do, but because it was the only place I could think without my mother's voice in the walls. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes just breathing. Here's what they didn't know: I wasn't just independent. I had been quietly, carefully, almost obsessively independent for 7 years. After I graduated and took a junior analyst position at a mid-sized consulting firm in Charlotte, I'd lived below my means so consistently that most people who knew me thought I was a little frugal, maybe kind of boring. I drove a 2014 Civic. I brought lunch from home. I wore the same rotation of 5 blazers. What I didn't tell anyone, not my mother, not Sylvie, not Dale, was that at 24 I'd started a small financial consulting practice on the side. I did it mostly because I was good at it and because I was terrified of needing anyone. That fear, it turns out, is a hell of a business driver. By 27, it was generating more than my day job. By 29, I had quietly folded it into an LLC called Harmon Advisory Group, which I ran under a name none of my family would recognize. By the time my mother sent that text, Harmon Advisory Group had 12 corporate clients, 2 government contracts, and an annual revenue north of $4 million. I kept living at home because I trusted no one with that information yet. The consulting world is small and strange, and I'd seen what happened to people who talked. I also kept living at home, if I'm honest, because some part of me kept waiting for my family to just be decent, to stop surprising me with how small they could be. That night in the parking garage, I let go of that hope completely. It didn't feel like heartbreak. It felt like exhaling something I'd been holding for years. I found a furnished short-term rental the next morning. Corporate housing, clean, anonymous, 3 miles from my office. I started moving my things out in loads over the following week, quietly, while Dale was at work and my mother was doing her volunteer shifts at the church. On the last day, I drove my Civic to the house, walked through the front door, and went room to room one final time. I took everything with my name on it. My books, my filing cabinet, the small fireproof safe from my closet shelf. My mother was in the kitchen. She watched me carry the safe past her. "You don't have to be dramatic," she said. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm being thorough." She didn't hug me. I didn't expect her to. What she did do, what I found out 3 days later, was call my cell provider and try to have my phone number transferred to a new account under her name. When that didn't work, she filed a complaint saying the account was fraudulent. I only found out because I got an email from the carrier's fraud department asking me to confirm my identity. I confirmed it. The complaint was closed. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The house where I'd grown up, where my mother had lived for 23 years, was not owned by Dale. Most people assumed it was. Dale certainly acted like it was. He paid the mortgage, yes, but the deed had been in my grandmother's name until she died. And then, because my grandmother loved me and I was the only one who'd visited her in the nursing home those last 2 years, she'd left it to me. I'd never told anyone, not because I was scheming. Because I knew what would happen if I did. My attorney had advised me to put the property into a trust. We'd done that quietly 5 years earlier. The house was technically owned by a real estate holding entity my attorney managed. The mortgage, which I had been paying, routed through an account my family couldn't trace to me, kept everyone comfortable and none the wiser. Dale thought he was paying his mortgage. He was actually paying me. My attorney called me 2 weeks after I moved out. "We have a problem," she said. Dale had gone to a local bank and applied for a home equity line of credit. On the application, he had listed himself as the property owner and had provided documents, forged. My attorney was fairly certain, suggesting he held title. He'd also listed his household income and apparently decided to include me, citing my salary at my firm, which he'd apparently Googled and guessed at. He listed my income on a federal loan application as somewhere in the ballpark of $200,000 a year, which was not only wrong but constituted bank fraud. My attorney used the word brazen. The bank's title search, she told me, would hit a wall. The property was not in Dale's name. It was not in my mother's name. When the bank dug deeper, they would find the trust, and the trust would point them toward questions Dale could not answer cleanly. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about it for exactly 1 day. "Nothing yet," I said. "Let it run. I want to explain that decision because I know how it sounds. Letting someone commit fraud and not immediately reporting it sounds like either cowardice or cruelty. But I'd watched Dale operate for 22 years. He was not a man who learned lessons from close calls. He was a man who needed to feel the full weight of a consequence, or he'd find a way to tell himself it was someone else's fault." So I waited. The bank's title search came back the way my attorney predicted. The loan application was denied. Dale, furious and confused, called a real estate attorney of his own, a man he'd found on a billboard near the highway, which tells you something. That attorney told Dale that the property was held in a trust. Dale called my mother. My mother called me. I let it go to voicemail. "Sweetheart," she said, which was the first time she'd called me that in probably 8 years. "There seems to be some confusion about the house. Can you call us back? It's nothing serious. Just need to clear something up." I listened to it twice, then I sent it to my attorney and did not call back. What happened next was a sequence I could not have scripted better if I'd tried. Dale, convinced there was some clerical error or misunderstanding, hired a title research firm to trace the property history. That firm discovered my grandmother's will, then the trust transfer, then the entity name on the deed. They gave Dale a report. Dale, reading the entity name, apparently did not connect it to me at all. He connected it to a woman named Harmon. He thought it was a stranger who'd somehow acquired the property through a probate mistake. He called my attorney's office directly, demanding to speak to whoever managed the trust. My attorney called me laughing, which I'd never heard her do before. "He wants to buy it back," she said. "He made an offer." "What offer?" "Below market, significantly." I said, "Tell him the entity is not currently taking offers. Tell him the trust is under review." "For what?" "Anything. Make something up. Actually, don't. Just say it's under periodic administrative review. That's true of every trust." She said she would. Meanwhile, Dale decided to escalate in a different direction. He spoke to a mutual acquaintance, someone who went to the same church as my mother, a man who fancied himself a local real estate broker. This broker pulled the entity records and, through about 4 steps of searching I can only piece together now, eventually surfaced the name of the registered agent for the trust, my attorney. Her name is not unusual, but her law firm's website listed her specialty areas, and one of those specialty areas was listed as business and advisory law. Someone made a phone call. I don't know exactly who or exactly when. But at some point, someone connected my attorney's firm to Harmon Advisory Group, and someone connected Harmon Advisory Group to me. My mother called again on a Wednesday night. "I need you to call me back," she said in the voicemail. The warmth was gone. "There are questions about this property situation, and I think you know more than you've been saying. Please call me back tonight." I called her back the next morning from my office with my attorney on mute on the other line. "Hi, Mom. Is your name on some kind of trust for this house?" I let a beat pass. "Can you tell me why you're asking?" Dale found something. A company. Harmon something. "And your grandmother left? I mean, we always assumed she left the house to Dale and me. We've been paying the mortgage." "Dale has been paying the mortgage." "Yes, and we assumed." "Mom, the house is mine. Grandma left it to me. I put it in a trust 5 years ago. Dale has been paying me rent, essentially, without knowing it." Silence. Not short silence. Long silence, the kind that has texture. "That's," she started. "It's legal. It's properly documented. My attorney can send you the paperwork if you want to review it." "Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about that question. I thought about the text message. "We need your room. Sylvia's moving back in. You have until the end of the month." I thought about the table where nobody offered me a seat. I thought about Sylvie measuring for her furniture. "Honestly?" I said. "Because I knew this is how you'd react. Not about whether it was fair, about what it meant for you." She didn't respond. "I'll have my attorney reach out," I said. "There are some things you'll need to sign." The things they needed to sign were not punitive. That part I want to be clear about. I was not trying to put my mother and Dale on the street. My attorney had drafted a formal lease agreement at market rate for the neighborhood, which had appreciated considerably since my grandmother bought the house. Market rate was $2,200 a month. Dale had been paying $1,400. I was not asking them to leave. I was asking them to pay fair rent and to stop applying for loans using property that was not theirs. Dale refused to sign. He said I was pulling a stunt. He said the house should have gone to my mother. He said my grandmother had been confused at the end, which was not only false but offensive. My grandmother had been sharp and deliberate and had told me directly, the last time I saw her coherent, that she was leaving the house to me because I was the only one she trusted not to squander it. He threatened to contest the will. His billboard attorney apparently told him the window for contesting had long since closed. Then he threatened to sue for unjust enrichment, the argument being that because he'd been paying the mortgage without knowing the property wasn't his, he was owed something. My attorney explained patiently that paying rent on a property you don't own and receiving housing in exchange is not unjust enrichment. It is just rent. Then Dale made the mistake that ended all of it. He went back to the bank, the original bank where he'd applied for the HELOC. He submitted a second application, this time including a letter, which he'd apparently written himself and signed, claiming that he had ownership rights to the property by virtue of 20+ years of mortgage payments, and that the trust was under dispute. This letter contained statements he knew to be false on a federal lending application. That is wire fraud. My attorney filed the report. The bank's compliance department opened an investigation the same week. Because Dale had now applied for credit twice on a property he had no title to, and because the second application included a false attestation, the case was fairly clean. My attorney didn't have to do much except provide the documentation, the trust records, the property deed, the original applications, and let the bank's fraud examiners draw their own conclusions. 2 federal investigators came to Dale's workplace, a mid-size home improvement supply company where he managed the flooring department on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't plan the timing, it just happened that way. I heard about it from my mother, who called me crying. They came to his work, she said. There were 2 of them. They asked to speak with him in a conference room and everyone saw. I know, I said. Did you report him? My attorney filed a report, yes. He was just trying to protect our home. It's not your home, Mum, that's the point. She cried harder. I let her. Sylvie is very upset, she said eventually. I thought about Sylvie measuring for her furniture. I thought about how my mother had texted me, not called, when she told me to leave. I thought about all the times I'd been called the stable one, as though stability was a thing I'd been born with, instead of something I'd built in spite of them. I hope Sylvie finds something that works out for her, I said, and I meant it. The investigation took 4 months. Dale was not arrested. The case was civil rather than criminal ultimately, because the bank had caught the fraud before any funds were dispersed. But there were fines. There was a formal finding of attempted fraud on a federal application. There was a period during which Dale could not apply for any new credit, which meant certain things they'd been planning. I don't know exactly what, my mother never told me. Fell apart. He also lost his job at the flooring company. I don't know the details of that either. My mother implied it was because of the stress, but I suspect his employer was not enthusiastic about the federal investigation. By the time the dust settled, my mother and Sylvie were living in the house. Dale had moved in with his brother in Gastonia, and my attorney had sent a revised lease agreement, this time just to my mother, for $1,800 a month, which was below market, but fair. She signed it. She didn't call to thank me, or to apologize, or to say anything at all about any of it. She just signed the lease and my attorney sent me the scanned copy on a Friday afternoon and I looked at it for a moment at my desk. Then I forwarded it to my filing folder and went back to a client proposal I've been working on. I did eventually drive past the house, not to look at it exactly. More because it was on the way to a coffee shop I liked, and one Sunday morning I just didn't take the longer route around it. I slowed down at the stop sign on the corner. From the outside it looked the same as it always had. The gutters needed cleaning. The rosebush my grandmother had planted along the front walk was overgrown in the way it always got by late summer. I thought about her, my grandmother, the woman who had sat with me in her kitchen when I was 14 and told me that the most dangerous thing a woman could do was let other people define the size of her life. She'd been talking about something else entirely at the time, some argument she'd had with her own sister decades earlier, but I'd written it in my journal that night because I knew even then that it was something I needed to keep. She'd trusted me with the house because she'd known somehow what I'd do with it, not what I'd do to the family. I don't think she planned any of this, but that I'd be careful, that I'd be steady, that I wouldn't let it become a weapon, even when it could have been. I didn't sell it. I've thought about it. The property's worth close to $600,000 now, and there's a part of my financial brain that sees that number and starts doing calculations. But every time I think about selling, I think about the rosebush. I think about the kitchen table where I used to do homework while she made soup. I think about the fact that somewhere in the foundation of that house is a small space where she hid a note for me. She told me it was there. I've never gone looking for it because I'm not ready, and I think I'd like to be the one who decides what happens to all of that. Not Sylvie, not Dale, not my mother's idea of what's fair, which has always been a calculation I didn't understand. Me. My attorney jokes that I'm the only client she has who made $500,000 worth of real estate decisions by doing absolutely nothing. That's not entirely true. I made the decision years ago to be the person who showed up at the nursing home. I made the decision to build something quietly without needing anyone to see it. I made the decision the night my mother texted me about my room. Not to scream. Those weren't small decisions, they just looked that way from the outside. Which I come to understand is exactly the point. I keep thinking about the moment Dale pressed his palms flat on that kitchen table and said, "You'll figure it out." Like I was a problem being reassigned. not a person being discarded. He said it with such confidence. That's the part I couldn't shake for months. Not the anger in it, but the certainty. He was so sure he understood the situation completely. He didn't understand it at all. And I think that's the real through line here. Not the house, not the legal filings, not the fraud investigation. It's the question of what happens when people confuse silence for weakness, and what happens when they find out they were wrong. I was quiet for 7 years. Quiet about the money, quiet about the trust, quiet about what my grandmother had told me in that nursing home room with the window that looked out over a parking lot. People in my family read that quietness as smallness, as someone who could be managed, someone who wouldn't push back because she never had before. What they missed, what I think people often miss, is that there's a difference between someone who can't fight and someone who has chosen not to yet. I wasn't passive, I was building. Every year I kept my head down at the firm, every client I brought into Harmon Advisory quietly, every mortgage payment that routed through an account they couldn't trace, that was a choice, not a scheme. A decision rooted in the understanding that the world responds to what you've actually constructed, not to what you claim. That's something I learned the hard way, and I think it's something worth sitting with. Integrity isn't just about being honest in the moments when honesty is easy. It's about behaving the same way whether anyone is watching or not, building the same thing in private that you'd be willing to show in public. I never did anything with that property I wouldn't have been comfortable explaining to a judge, and eventually I did explain it to one. That mattered. The intelligence piece, the strategy, the patience, the decision to let Dale's second loan application run its course rather than intervening early. That wasn't coldness. It was clarity. I understood that a lesson Dale could absorb was more valuable than a confrontation he could reframe. People who feel attacked get defensive. People who walk into a consequence of their own making have a much harder time blaming someone else for it. And the part that doesn't get talked about enough, it took endurance. Not dramatic, visible endurance. The quiet kind. The kind that looks, from the outside, like nothing is happening. 7 years of living below what I could afford. 7 years of visiting a nursing home while my family stayed home. 7 years of not correcting people when they underestimated me because I knew the correction would come eventually in a form that couldn't be argued with. I'm not saying I handled everything perfectly. I've thought about whether I should have told my mother about the house years earlier. Maybe. But I also know myself well enough to know that I would have been talked out of the trust, out of the careful legal structure, out of the protection my grandmother intended for me. Because that's what that family did. They talked you into arrangements that benefited them and called it love. The rose bush is still there, overgrown, same as always. And the house is still mine. Some things just take time to become exactly what they were always supposed to be.